Terrormorph, one of the many creatures you can find in the Settle system. But it's also one of the only creatures that humanity fears. What exactly do we know about the Terramorph? Where did it come from? And why is it so dangerous? Join me as we talk about the Terramorph and have a chat. Alright, hello there, and welcome back. As a little intro kind of alluded to, today we're going to be talking about the Terramorph, the apex predator of the Settle system. So a lot of this is going to be based on information we know in-game, but there is going to be some speculation, because one of the issues with Starfield being a new game is a lot of the lore is still kind of open-ended because, you know, it's a new game. Bethesda hasn't had the time to explain everything. But yeah, let's jump into it with the Terramorph. So, Terramorph is essentially the equivalent of the Deathclaw of the Starfield universe. As you see here, it is a very large, aggressive, sentient creature that has numerous abilities under its belt, if it wore a belt. One of which is probably one of the most interesting, is its ability to use a variation of mind control on not only other Xeno specimens, but also humans, which that's what kind of started or piqued my interest on the Terramorph. Like, it's one thing to kind of control, like a generic Xeno creature, because as we know, we're going to be referencing real world elements to some of this, but as we know, with like a lot of creatures in real life, a lot of animals, the level of intelligence of the creature, it depends on them. You know, like obviously things like dolphins, dogs, cats, quite intelligent, but as you kind of go down the list, certain creatures are less intelligent, and generally speaking, the creatures the Terramorph tends to take over, usually you could kind of put it down to like, oh, you know, they're dumb drones. But the fact that it can take over and control the minds of humans is honestly very chilling and scary. Now, it doesn't work on every human. Some humans are immune to it, as you see in the storyline of the game. Some people get completely controlled, whereas the player kind of experiences other things. Now, we'll talk more about that in a minute, but we're going to kind of jump into... We're going to jump into kind of the first little kind of bits of information regarding the Terramorph. So, I'm going to be referencing some Wikipedia articles just to kind of get me information, and I will say, straight off the bat, like anything else, this is kind of just opinion piece. So you may hear me disagree with some things, just because I'm just looking at it and I'm thinking that can't be true. But one of the first things the wiki article mentions is that they're native to the planet of Ptolemy 2. Now, we do know that they are, I suppose that's native, doesn't mean it was born there, never mind. That makes sense now. Yeah, so we know that they exist on Ptolemy 2, and we had the instance of Londinion, which was quite travesty. Well, actually, really quickly, we'll play the little issue here.
In the midst of the colony war, a different kind of tragedy struck the UC city of Londinion. A newly constructed but critical supply center for the United Colonies' war effort, Londinion found itself overrun by one of the galaxy's most mysterious predators, the Terramorph. A rare but pervasive threat to all human-settled worlds, Terramorphs swept over the city, seemingly out of nowhere, on a scale never before seen in recorded history. Valiant efforts by the UC military slowed the onslaught, but the creatures proved unstoppable. Ultimately, the decision was made to destroy the Londinion spaceport. sealing off the city, the outbreak, and its citizenry from the galaxy at large. The tragedy of Londinion is mourned by the UC to this day.
So you see here this little kind of thing. This is where the Terramorph first pops into kind of the universe, like at large. They seemingly come out of nowhere and they completely devastate the settlement of Londinium. And it's not really, again, a lot of it's going to be speculation, but there's not a lot of information regarding why they chose to attack Londinium, and also in the numbers they did. When we come across Terrormorphs in the Starfield universe, usually they're on their own. Sometimes you might get groups of maybe 2 to 4, but that's kind of the most you'll see. And realistically, singular Terrormorphs, while they are a threat to humanity, a well-trained Xeno warfare squad, or even a squad of UC Marines, or probably Rangers, would be able to take on a Terramorph and destroy it, as long as they're aware of it's there and, that's their purpose. So the fact that, the numbers that were needed to kind of wipe Londinium, it must be in the hundreds, if not thousands. And it also kind of begs the question of what happened. Now, for a little bit of kind of side explanation, the Terramorph have a kind of have a natural predator in the Aciles. The Aciles are these giant kind of like long necks. They kind of look like a mix between like a giraffe with like a bird beak, and they keep the Terramorphs in check. We don't really know how too much. Maybe they feed on the heat leeches, which the heat leeches is kind of what the Terramorph comes from. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it is speculated that because of the colony wars, because of Londinium not having enough resources to sustain the colony, they resulted in eating the Aciles that they had. And there's speculation that that was what caused the Terramorphs to attack in numbers, because the Aciles couldn't basically eradicate them. But I don't really think that's necessarily the case, because these Aciles would have been domesticated and for the most part would have been kind of held at farms. They wouldn't have been wild. If they were wild Aciles, I could definitely understand it, but the lore references that they basically butchered their domesticated stock to survive. So while I think obviously the Aciles that were held in these kind of farming areas probably would have been able to quell some of the Terramorph, I don't think the lack of Aciles was the reason they attacked. The other thing in it also is the fact that they attack humans, to like specifically seek out and attack humans. Like we know in the real world, very few creatures on the planet will actively hunt humans. Or I'm gonna have to dismantle you if you don't stop coughing. There's like cases of like rogue polar bears and tigers and lions and stuff like that, but for the most part, almost all creatures on the planet of Earth realize that we as humans are very dangerous and they tend to stay clear of us. So the fact that it's a common trait amongst all Terramorphs to actively seek out and target humans, and obviously, there is creatures in Starfield like Xenos that will attack humans, but that's more down to crossing, you cross these creatures' paths, they'll attack you. The fact that Terramorphs go out of their way to hunt humans, it's quite interesting and again, very creepy. So we go back, we'll talk about the life cycle of a Terramorph. So we didn't fully realize the extent of, the Terramorph and the heat leeches, and their kind of their relationship, until near the end of the UC Vanguard questline, where we find out that heat leeches will turn into Terramorphs after a period of time, and that time can be sped up astronomically by utilizing a plant called the Lazarus plant, which we know supposedly only exists in Ptolemy. Again, all of this kind of comes back to Ptolemy. While the obviously, while the Terrormorphs are native to the planet Ptolemy, they exist in other places, and pretty much it's said in the game that anywhere that humans set up settlements, Terrormorphs will eventually appear. And that's usually because of heat leeches. Heat leeches are small little creatures. In the lore, they're kind of mentioned as they can be quite dangerous, and they will wrap around any sort of a heat source and basically kind of cocoon themselves. And I'm assuming that's what happens, is it will cocoon itself and eventually it will kind of turn into, like with a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. Caterpillars turn into butterflies, don't they? I need to check that out. Have I been lied to? Yes, they do. Metamorphosis. So the metamorphosis of the heat leech is turning into the Terrormorphs. Not as beautiful as a butterfly. I mean, beautiful in some regards. So the heat leech is kind of the way that the Terramorphs can kind of pop up anywhere, because heat leeches are smaller, they're harder to find, and like they tend to always pop up in your ship. You see references to mechanics in games, ship mechanics and ship technicians saying like, be careful with heat leeches and stuff. It also references in the lore that they can latch on to humans and cause them to asphyxiate and die. Now, I don't know if this is the case, and for gameplay purposes, the heat leeches are generally very weak. You know, like any sort of a weapon or even a melee, like a bash, will usually destroy them, which is quite ironic considering like that they become probably one of the most tankiest creatures in the game. So yeah, so we know the heat leeches tend to follow, you know, humans because of the ships and stuff. Now, this is where it kind of gets interesting. So we don't know where the Terramorph kind of originated. We know that Ptolemy is, you know, and again, if I have played a lot of Starfield, but there's some things I might miss. So if I say something here that is contradictory, by all means, let me know in the comments, but please give proof. Don't just be like, no, Crimson, you're wrong because you're an idiot. But we, yeah, so we don't know exactly where they first, you know, or where they originated from. We know that they first popped up Ptolemy, but that's, you know, they exist everywhere. Now, it got me thinking, did they exist on Earth? Did they only kind of pop up after Earth? We know that heat leeches exist on Mars. So is it possible that heat leeches existed on Earth? There's speculation that's because the Terramorph has been talked about quite a lot in the community, in my community. We've had many chats in the Astro Lounge about Terramorphs, and one that was quite interesting that was brought up was the idea that the Terramorphs are somewhat linked to the grav drive, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it, considering that it follows humans from place to place, and it's like, what's the common denominator, but like, you know, with it, like, it's what's something that didn't exist on Earth? Because if heat leeches were a thing in kind of pre-collapse Earth, there would be references to them. There's not. What one kind of thing happened that kind of, you know, coincided with kind of Terramorphs, and that's the grav drive being created. Maybe, again, this is all speculation, but like, is there something more to the Terramorphs and the heat leeches? Like, they're kind of treated as, while being a very powerful apex predator, they're still just, you know, your run-of-the-mill kind of Xeno. Nothing kind of out of the ordinary. But I would argue the point that I think that there may be a lot more to them, you know? And obviously this, again, speculation, but it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. Like, the fact that they're following humans around and, you know, stowing aboard ships that have grav drives in them, and then once they kind of land, they kind of scuttle away, but they stay close enough that they're always a threat to humans, you know? Like, it would be one thing if they kind of, you know, they used the terror, like if you look at instances of, like, say, animals stowing aboard ships back in the day when, you know, Age of Sail, and how they would kind of pop up and kind of just spread wild and, you know, rampant. Like an example is the grey squirrel in Ireland I think was brought over and has decimated the red squirrel population. But the fact that the Terrormorphs tend to always seem to stay close enough to humans that when they do pop up, they cause problems. Again, it's very, very strange. It's almost like that there's something innate in them that makes them want to hunt and keep close to humans. Now, if we like take a look at the Terramorph here, they look very interesting. So one of the things you see is like they look almost like, they kind of remind me a little bit of the Flood from Halo, which if you've played Halo, you'll know what the Flood is. Just in that they're like entire skin and stuff, it's all one kind of type of material. You know, there's no really telltale, like, you know, like with certain animals, like you have like scales, you have feathers, you have like stuff like that. This is just kind of one solid thing, you know. Now they do tend to have like certain quirks to them, like they have like on them they have like these kind of lesions or boils. We don't know what that is. There is actually like I'll put up a picture now. There's reference to it in concept art. It's hard to read and make out, but it's clearly UC scientists were trying to figure out, you know, what exactly they do. The other thing is when you look at them, like, it's very clear they are bred for combat, or they are, you know, they've got teeth inside teeth. They've got primary kind of hands here that like function as like, you know, hands but also claws, but then they've got like these secondary kind of pincers that are meant for combat. They've got massive back legs that allow them to leap. They can tunnel. Like, to be honest, they look like you look at all of the different Xenos in Starfield universe, and they kind of fit into the, you know, they fit into where you find them. Terramorphs, honestly, they look alien, you know? Like they're not from where we are. And again, this makes me assume the whole thing of like, you know, maybe they're tied to the Unity. Like, what if they were like a failsafe designed by the Unity to follow humanity? Again, speculation. So now let's talk about the psychic ability, or the psionic ability, with the Terramorphs being able to control mind control. So in game, we see them mind controlling characters. The first time we spot it is when we are doing the UC Vanguard questline, where they attack the spaceport, and you come across various human NPCs, civilians that have been basically taken over, and you have to use EM weapons to basically, you know, kind of knock them out of it. Which that kind of leads to the next question, which we'll get to in a moment. But they don't always they can't control everyone. Some people seem to be immune to their effect. The player character is not inherently immune. When they talk to the player, when they try to control the player character, or you hear voices in your head. It could be a sound of like a scared woman telling you to run away. It could be the sound of like a UC Marine, you know, telling you that they're gonna get you. You know, it could be, there's loads of different things. And honestly, the first time you experience this as the player, well, when I experienced it, I didn't realize what was going on. The first time I properly experienced it was when I went to Ptolemy to basically eradicate them. And I had I think a woman screaming, "Help, I need help." And I was really confused because I was like, oh, is there people still here? One of the other things I heard them frequently say is they'll say, "Behind you, turn around now," which I think is quite interesting because it'll usually pop up when you're fighting them. which is kind of like a cheat move. Like they're trying to get you to basically turn around and, you know, so they can sneak attack you, and not sneak attack you, but basically hit you from behind. Now the how they go about doing this kind of control method, it's unknown. Some people speculate pheromones. I don't necessarily think it's pheromones for various reasons. So one of the first reasons I don't think it's pheromones is because they can control you through a spacesuit through a large distance. Now, obviously, we know that spacesuits in Starfield aren't exactly bulletproof and that even, like, snow can get through them. But that's an oversight. I would like to think that, you know, that the pheromone thing, I don't know, like maybe it works with maybe with some of the Xenos, but with humans I don't think so. The other element of why I don't think it's pheromones is they use pheromones to control a human, and then the only way you can break the connection is either by killing them or by EMing them. And when you EM them, it knocks them unconscious, right? Which, if they were using pheromones, knocking them unconscious wouldn't inherently... It wouldn't, and then this is me speculating here, amateur scientist, I don't think the pheromones would have any real effect on the whole knocking them unconscious, because if the pheromones are controlling their body and their brain and all of their, you know, their systems, EMPing them isn't going to do a whole lot, you know? Because it might close down the brain, but they don't need the brain to function, you know? Like, it's very clear that, you know, that when you kind of see them in action, that, yeah, I would like to think that it's more on a psychic level, or I don't know what the correct term is for modern. It's like, obviously you've got psionics and stuff, but that's from XCOM. But I do think it's some kind of like psychological thing, like a brain power. Because the fact that they can communicate to you over a specific distance. The distance is very, like, it's not incredibly long. They have to kind of, it seems like they have to have line of sight of you. And then just how it goes about, again, the whole, like, thing of it's, like, communicating with your brain and taking over your brain. When you EM someone who is infected or taken over, it nullifies the effect. Again, that makes sense. Because if they're using your brain directly to control you, and then knocking someone out essentially kind of puts their brain in a kind of a dormant state, you know, like a kind of a sleep state. Now, obviously, all of this is speculative, but it's that alone, kind of the control feature, it's so interesting, and it makes me hope that Bethesda will eventually kind of expand upon it, because from an in-game lore point of view, can you imagine scientists gaining the ability to control? Now, we do have, like, Ryujin have, like, the brain control thingy, which that's more of a kind of a mechanical object, or a, you know, like a tech item, and it has limits to an extent. You can, like, it's manipulation, you can basically, I kind of see that as, well, I mean, they show it in the lore and stuff. Like, it operates kind of on a similar principle. But that, again, I suppose that in itself is quite a good question, because one of the things I always find interesting with Ryujin is Ryujin never make their own tech. They tend to steal their tech. Like the particle weapon, the Arborin particle weapons. I would like to speculate that Ryujin stole that technology from Varun, because House Varun, I believe, were the first to do the whole particle technology. I believe, again, speculation. It is possible that maybe their manipulator, maybe their tool is some sort of prototype that works on a similar principle. Now, we don't have anything to back that up. I don't think there's any Ryujin labs with Terrormorphs in them, and there's no reference to it in the story. But it just, yeah, like, can you imagine, like, having the ability to like, control on a level that, like, the Terramorph level would be absolutely insane. Like, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the voice from Dune, the way the Terramorphs kind of get you, where they kind of, it makes you susceptible to, what is it, like, you know, hypnosis? It's like hypnosis, but like you don't have to be put unconscious, and everything is, you know, with hypnosis, apparently, I've never done it, but apparently with hypnosis, it's only things you would actually do, you know, like they can't ask you to do something you wouldn't normally do. You're just highly susceptible. Whereas the Terramorph, it's like it's on a way higher level. Which, yeah, that in itself, like, it's, yeah. But I do hope the Bethesda go more in on it, because it's, like, it's very clear just looking at it, like, that there's more to the Terramorph than meets the, well, they don't even have eyes. And while the UC questline kind of ends, like, the whole Terramorph problem to an extent, I do hope that eventually we get some update that kind of proves that that didn't work the way it did. Because I think the Terramorph are one of the most interesting, enemies Bethesda have implemented into a Bethesda title. And who knows, maybe one day we might meet or get to communicate with the Terramorph. And for anyone referencing that one mod where you talked with Terramorph, don't disrespect Terramorphs by referencing that. But yeah, so a little bit more lore. We know that the UC did try to, the Xeno Warfare Division did try to use them as weapons, much like what they did with Sirens and stuff. That didn't work. They were way too powerful to be controlled, and it resulted in just, yeah, it was catastrophic. Like, the fact that the Terramorph, after the Londinium, like, information on the Terramorph, so like everything, you know, from all the tests and stuff with the Terramorph, Xeno Warfare, all of that was put into the Armistice Vault. Again, kind of highlights the true danger when you have House Faroon, Freestar Collective, and the United Colony, who are all kind of at odds with one another, coming together and realizing we need to lock this information away because they are a threat. That in itself just kind of highlights how dangerous they are. Also, so with the whole, like, you know, with the whole heat leeches kind of latching on to like a ship and stuff, and like energy sources, we don't see it in game, but can you imagine if you're just flying a ship one day and you go to open the, like, the, you know, the cargo hold, just a Terramorph chilling there, be like, uh-oh. Because then it poses the question, like, would a Terramorph control, again, it goes back to the mind control, like, how far does the mind control go? Would a Terramorph control a human to fly a ship to a specific planet, like if they wanted to, you know? We know that in Halo, the Flood very well can. The Flood in Halo, whenever they take over like a host body, they gain the knowledge of that host. So for instance, if that host knows how to pilot a ship, they also know how to pilot a ship. If that host is proficient in using certain weapons, they are proficient in certain weapons. I referenced the Flood, comparing the Flood to the Terramorph, just because I feel like they're the most similar in that they're both Apex. Now, obviously, the Flood are on a completely different level, you know? Like, if that was the Flood on Londinium, by Jesus, it would have ended way different. But yeah, that's pretty much it. A little bit of lore, a lot of speculation. Let me know what you think. Anything about the Terramorph that, like, you thought was really cool, or like a little, like, kind of interesting tidbit? And then what do you think about, like, how they communicate, like how they're able to kind of do that control? Like, do you think it is some sort of pheromones? Do you think it's, you know, something else? But yeah, let me know what you guys think. As always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.